The puppy appeared out of nowhere, a small blur of tan and black fur, darting into the path of the man in running shoes, forcing him to stop so suddenly that his breath caught in his throat. The German Shepherd pup planted its paws firmly on the sidewalk, ears half flopped, tail wagging with desperate urgency, and stared up at him as if it had been waiting its whole short life for this exact moment. The man looked down, instinctively scanning for danger, for traffic, for some sign that the animal was lost or hurt. His name was Luke Carter, and although the quiet suburban street looked peaceful, years of training as a Navy SEAL had taught him that moments like this, moments that felt oddly still, often mattered the most. Luke had been trying to outrun his thoughts that morning. He was on leave, visiting his sister in a small town, far from bases and briefing rooms, far from the constant noise of responsibility. Civilian life still felt unfamiliar, like a shirt that never quite fit right. The air smelled of cut grass and early summer warmth, and for a moment, he wished he could just keep running, keep pretending he was simply another man jogging through a neighborhood. But the puppy whined softly and stepped closer, nudging Luke's shin with its nose, then turning its head and looking back the way it had come. Luke frowned, his instincts humming. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, crouching down. The puppy didn't want to be petted. It wanted something else. The dog trotted a few steps away, stopped, and looked back again, whining louder now. Luke straightened, scanning the street. No owner in sight. No leash. No cars. Just the quiet hum of distant lawnmowers and birds. He hesitated for half a second. The part of him that had learned to keep moving, to avoid distractions. But another part, older and deeper, the part that believed in watching over the vulnerable, took over. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than the dog. "Lead the way." The puppy's ears perked, and it turned, practically dancing with relief as it guided him down the sidewalk, then off onto a narrow side path between two houses. As they walked, Luke noticed how the puppy kept checking to make sure he was following, its small body tense with purpose. This wasn't play. This was urgency. The path opened into a modest backyard, where the grass had grown uneven and the fence leaned slightly, as if it hadn't been repaired in a long time. Near the back porch sat a man in a wheelchair, slumped awkwardly to one side. One wheel was stuck in a shallow hole in the dirt, the footrest twisted. The man's face was pale, his hands trembling as he tried, unsuccessfully, to free himself. When he saw Luke, his eyes widened with a mix of embarrassment and relief. "Oh, thank God," the man said, his voice strained. I dropped my phone. "I've been stuck here for nearly an hour." The puppy ran straight to him, jumping up gently against his leg, whining as if scolding him for being alone. Luke moved quickly, kneeling beside the wheelchair, assessing the situation with calm efficiency. He spoke gently, explaining what he was doing as he stabilized the chair and lifted it just enough to free the trapped wheel. Within moments, the chair was upright and secure again. The man exhaled shakily, running a hand over his face. "I didn't think anyone would hear me," he said. "Max must have gone looking." He smiled down at the puppy, who immediately sat, proud and alert. "Good boy," the man whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Luke felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen bravery in many forms, on battlefields, in teammates who risked everything. But this quiet loyalty, this tiny creature's determination to help its human, struck him just as powerfully. Luke introduced himself, and the man said his name was Henry Wallace. He explained that he had been paralyzed from the waist down after a construction accident years earlier. Since then, life had been a series of adjustments, small battles fought quietly every day. Max, the puppy, had been a gift from a neighbor who thought Henry could use the companionship. "I didn't expect him to save me," Henry said with a weak laugh. "I was just supposed to be the one taking care of him." Luke helped Henry back onto the porch, making sure he was comfortable. As they talked, Luke learned that Henry lived alone. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and his daughter lived several states away, balancing her own family and responsibilities. Henry never complained, but the loneliness lingered in his eyes. Luke recognized that look. He had seen it in veterans who returned home carrying invisible weight, in himself during quiet nights when the world felt too still. When Luke finally stood to leave, Henry reached out. "Son," he said, his voice steady now, "you don't know what this means. You didn't have to stop." Luke shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "The puppy made it pretty clear I didn't have a choice," he replied, glancing down at Max, who wagged his tail as if he understood every word. As Luke walked back toward the street, he felt different, lighter, somehow. He told himself it was nothing, just helping someone out, but the truth was, something had shifted. Over the next few days, Luke found himself thinking about Henry and Max more than he expected. He drove by the house once, then twice, telling himself he was just checking in. On the third day, he stopped and knocked on the door, carrying a bag of groceries. Henry looked surprised, then genuinely pleased. "I was hoping you'd come back," he admitted. They talked for hours that afternoon. Henry shared stories of his life before the accident, of building things with his hands, of dancing with his wife in the kitchen. Luke shared pieces of his own story, not missions or medals, but the quieter truths about fear, loss, and the strange emptiness that sometimes followed coming home. A bond formed, simple and honest. Luke began stopping by regularly, helping with small repairs around the house, adjusting the ramp near the porch, walking Max when Henry's back hurt too much. In return, Henry offered perspective, reminding Luke that strength wasn't only about endurance or discipline, but about allowing yourself to care. Max grew bigger by the week, his paws comically large, his loyalty unwavering. He followed Luke everywhere, as if sensing that this man was now part of his pack. One afternoon, an unexpected storm rolled in, sudden and violent. The power went out across the neighborhood, plunging the house into darkness. Henry's medical equipment ran on backup power, but Luke noticed the warning light blinking. Without hesitation, he carried Henry's portable supplies to his truck, drove through the rain to a nearby clinic, and returned with a charged battery and extra provisions. Henry watched him work, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I used to think I was just surviving," he said quietly. "But you and that dog, you reminded me that people still show up." For Luke, the realization came just as strongly. He had spent years training to save lives in extreme circumstances, believing that was where he mattered most. But here, in a quiet neighborhood, with a man in a wheelchair and a growing puppy at his side, he understood something profound. Heroism wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like stopping when a puppy blocked your path. Sometimes it meant listening. Sometimes it meant choosing to stay. When Luke's leave came to an end, the goodbye was difficult. Henry tried to smile, but his hands shook. Max whined, sensing change. Luke knelt in front of the puppy, scratching behind his ears. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. "You did real good." He promised Henry he'd keep in touch, and he meant it. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Henry on the porch, Max sitting proudly at his side, both watching until the truck disappeared from view. Months later, Luke received a letter. Henry wrote about how he had started volunteering online, mentoring other people adjusting to life in wheelchairs. He wrote about Max, now nearly full-grown, who still sat by the porch every morning as if waiting for Luke to come running down the street. That day you stopped, Henry wrote, changed more than you know. You reminded me that even when we feel stuck, help can come from the most unexpected places. Luke folded the letter carefully, holding it for a long moment. He thought about the puppy's determined eyes, about the simple choice to follow instead of walk away. In a world that often rushed past quiet needs, that small act of compassion had rippled outward, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. And as Luke prepared to return to duty, he carried that lesson with him, certain now that wherever he went, the most important moments would still be the ones where he chose to stop, to care, and to follow the call of humanity, sometimes led by a puppy with a brave heart.